never thought I'd be one of those people who ignored obvious red flags and paid for it later. I used to read stories on Reddit and think, that would never be me. I trusted my boyfriend, completely. Or at least, I thought I did. We had been together for almost 2 years. Not perfect, but stable. He was the kind of guy who liked routine. Same coffee order, same gym time, same excuses. When he moved into an apartment with 2 roommates, I didn't panic. One was his best friend since college. The other was a woman he introduced as basically my elder sister. Those were his exact words. She's family, he said. I grew up with her energy around me. That should have sounded strange, but I believed him. She acted mature, calm, always polite. She'd smile at me, ask about my work, compliment my clothes. I remember thinking how lucky I was that my boyfriend lived with someone so normal. The first crack appeared quietly. Whenever I stayed over, she was always there. Late nights in the kitchen, early mornings on the couch. If I walked in, conversations would stop mid-sentence. My boyfriend brushed it off, said I was imagining things, said I was tired, said I was insecure. I hated that word. Insecure. It made me doubt myself more than him. Things escalated slowly. He stopped texting back quickly. He'd cancel plans last minute. When I asked what was wrong, he said work stress. When I asked for reassurance, he said I was pressuring him. Meanwhile, she started acting distant. No more friendly chats, no eye contact. One night, I showed up unannounced. I wasn't trying to catch him, I just wanted comfort. It had been a bad day, and I needed my boyfriend. I used my spare key and walked in quietly. I heard laughter from his bedroom. Not loud, not obvious, soft, intimate. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to confirm what my gut already knew, but I did anyway. They were on his bed. Not fully dressed, not innocent. Too close, too comfortable. I don't remember screaming, I don't remember crying, I just remember the look on his face. Not guilt, not shock, but annoyance, like I had interrupted something inconvenient. She didn't mean for this to happen, he said. She wouldn't even look at me. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process the humiliation fast enough. The woman who was like an elder sister was sitting in my boyfriend's bed, wrapped in his blanket, while he tried to explain it away like a misunderstanding. I walked out. No dramatic speech, no throwing things. I just left. I spent hours walking with no destination. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from him, missed calls, explanations that all sounded the same. It's not what it looks like. You're overreacting. Let's talk. I didn't reply. Eventually, I ended up at a bar. I didn't want to drink, but I did. One drink turned into another. My thoughts blurred, but the pain didn't. That's when his best friend found me. He hadn't known what happened yet. He just saw me sitting alone, eyes red, barely holding myself together. He asked what was wrong, and everything spilled out. Not in a dramatic way, just facts. Short sentences, ugly truths. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't defend his friend. He said, "You don't deserve that." I don't remember leaving the bar. I don't remember the drive. I only remember feeling exhausted, emotionally hollowed out. The next thing I remember was waking up in a bed that wasn't mine. The room smelled different. Clean. Familiar, but not that familiar. My head throbbed. My mouth was dry. When I shifted, I felt fabric brush against my hand and something cold and solid on my finger. A ring. I lifted my hand slowly. Gold. Antique. Heavy. I knew that ring. It was his grandmother's. And it was on my finger. The first thing I did was sit up too fast. The room spun, forcing me to grip the edge of the bed. Sunlight filtered through half-open blinds, landing on a dresser that clearly didn't belong to my boyfriend. No scattered clothes, no dirty dishes, no chaos. Everything was neat, intentional. That's when the ring caught the light again. I stared at it like it might disappear if I focused hard enough. My fingers trembled as I slid it halfway off, then stopped. The weight of it felt wrong. Not physically, but emotionally. That ring was important. I'd heard stories about it more times than I could count. His grandmother wore it for 60 years. She gave it to only one person in the family. It was never supposed to be on my hand. The door creaked open softly. His best friend stepped in, holding a mug in one hand and a glass of water in the other. He froze when he saw me awake, then carefully set both down on the bedside table like he didn't want to startle me. "Before you panic," he said, calm but serious, "nothing happened that you didn't consent to." That sentence grounded me more than the water did. I nodded, slowly, my throat tight. "Then why am I wearing that ring?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I gave it to you." That snapped my attention fully. "You... what?" He didn't look proud or smug. If anything, he looked nervous, like someone who knew he'd crossed a line, but didn't regret it. "I didn't plan it," he said. "Last night got messy. You were hurting. I didn't want you going back there. You stayed here." I remembered fragments. Him insisting I drink water, him laying a blanket over me, him sitting on the edge of the bed while I cried. Nothing inappropriate, nothing forced. "But the ring," I pressed. He sat on the chair across from the bed. You kept saying you felt disposable, like you were easy to replace, like everything you gave meant nothing. My chest tightened. I told you that wasn't true. I told you some people don't lose value when someone else betrays them. He paused. Then I did something impulsive. He explained that the ring wasn't technically his. His grandmother had given it to him years ago, not as an engagement ring, but as a promise. She told him to give it to someone who felt like home, not obligation. I've never given it to anyone, he said, not even when I was in serious relationships. I stared at him, my heart pounding. Why me? Because last night, he said quietly, you didn't ask to be saved. You just needed someone not to lie to you. Silence settled between us. I slid the ring off my finger, holding it in my palm. I can't accept this. He nodded. I figured you'd say that. I placed it carefully on the table. But I need to understand something first. Okay? Does he know? A shadow crossed his face. Not yet. As if summoned by the question, my phone buzzed violently on the bed. Missed calls, messages, voicemails, all from my boyfriend. I didn't open them. Instead, I asked the question I'd been avoiding since I woke up. How long has it been going on? He didn't answer immediately. That bad? I asked. Longer than you think? Shorter than they pretend. My stomach dropped. He told me everything. The late night talks, the emotional dependence, the way my boyfriend complained about me while refusing to break up, the way the roommates slowly crossed lines while claiming innocence. They both justified it, in different ways. I felt sick, not surprised, but confirmed. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because it wasn't my place, until it was. Another buzz. This time, a text preview appeared. Him. Why are you with him? My blood ran cold. He knows, I said. He leaned forward. What did he say? I turned the screen toward him. He didn't look shocked, just disappointed. He went through my phone last night, saw my name in my ride receipt. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I took a deep breath. I'm not going back. I know, he said. And I'm not staying here either. He nodded again. I'll help you pack. I stood, steady now, stronger than I'd felt in days. As I slipped the ring into my bag for safekeeping, not to keep, just to return properly, I realized something unsettling. The betrayal wasn't over. It was just about to get loud. By the time we reached the apartment, the tension was thick enough to choke on. I could feel it before we even stepped inside, like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. His best friend parked the car and turned to me, asking if he wanted him to come in. I said yes without hesitation, not because I needed protection, but because I needed a witness. The door was unlocked. That alone told me everything. We stepped inside, and the apartment was too quiet. No TV, no music, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the weight of unfinished business. My boyfriend's shoes were by the door, but hers were gone. That absence felt deliberate. He came out of his room when he heard us. His eyes went straight to me, then to his best friend, then back to me again. His jaw tightened. So it's true, he said. I didn't answer. I didn't know him anything. Not explanations, not emotions, not closure. You didn't even wait a day, he continued, voice sharp. You really moved on fast. That's when I realized something important. He wasn't angry because he lost me. He was angry because he lost control of the story. I didn't move on, I said calmly. I walked away from someone who lied to my face. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're acting like you're innocent. You slept in his bed. Yes, I said, after you slept with someone you called family. The word family hit him harder than I expected. His face flickered, just for a moment. She's not like that, he snapped. You're twisting things. His best friend stepped forward. Don't. They stared at each other, years of history hanging between them. You knew, my boyfriend said. You watched this happen. I warned you, his friend replied, more than once. That stopped him. I walked past them toward the bedroom to grab my things. My hands were steady as I packed, even though my chest felt tight. Every item I folded felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I reached the nightstand, I hesitated. There was a framed photo of us from last year, smiling, oblivious. I turned it face down. When I came back into the living room, she was standing there, the roommate. She looked composed, like someone who'd rehearsed this moment. Her arms were crossed, her expression calm, almost superior. She glanced at me, then at him. You didn't think you'd bring him, she said to my boyfriend, as if I wasn't even present. That was the last straw. You don't get to speak for him anymore, I said. She raised an eyebrow. I'm not the one who betrayed anyone. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You slept with someone who was in a committed relationship. That's betrayal. She shrugged. He was unhappy. I turned to him. Is that what you told her? He didn't answer. That silence said more than any confession. His best friend stepped in again. You told her you were stuck. You told her you were scared to leave. You told her lies. Her calm cracked. You don't know everything. I know enough, and so does she. I reached into my bag and pulled out the ring, holding it up between my fingers. The room went still. Her eyes widened. That ring, she said quietly, wasn't meant for you. I know. That's why I'm returning it. I turned to his best friend and placed it in his hand. He looked surprised but grateful. You didn't steal it. You let her wear it. That was my choice, he said firmly. My boyfriend snapped. You crossed a line. No, his friend replied. You erased it first. That was when the truth finally landed. My boyfriend wasn't losing just me. He was losing the respect of the one person who had always covered for him. "You destroyed this," his friend said. "No," his friend replied. "You did. I just stopped pretending." I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed for the door. No dramatic exit, no final speech, just clarity. As I stepped outside, my boyfriend called after me, "You'll regret this." I turned around one last time. I already regretted staying. Leaving is the first thing I've gotten right. The door closed behind me. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. The quiet didn't last long. By the next morning, my phone was full again. Missed calls from him. Long messages that swung between apology and accusation. One minute he took responsibility, the next he blamed stress, timing, misunderstandings. I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because there was nothing left to explain. I stayed at a friend's place that night. She didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. She just let me sleep, made coffee in the morning, and pretended everything was normal. That small kindness helped more than any speech could have. Around noon, the roommate reached out. Her message was polite, almost professional. She said she wanted to clear the air and hoped we could talk woman to woman. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Eventually, I replied with one sentence. "Say what you need to say here." She didn't like that. What followed was a long explanation about emotional connection, how she hadn't planned to develop feelings, how things just happened. She said she never meant to hurt me, and that she had actually encouraged him to be honest with me. That part made me laugh out loud. I knew better. I replied once more. "You don't accidentally cross the same line repeatedly." She didn't respond after that. Later that day, I got a message from his best friend. Short, direct. He said he had moved the ring back to his grandmother's safety box and thanked me for returning it without turning it into drama. He also told me he'd decided to move out. That surprised me. Apparently, the confrontation didn't end when I left. My boyfriend accused him of betrayal, of choosing me over years of friendship. The argument escalated fast. Voices were raised, old resentment surfaced. Things that had been ignored for years finally came out. The roommate left that night. She packed a bag and went to stay with someone else, claiming she needed space. My boyfriend didn't stop her. From what I heard later, he didn't even ask where she was going. That detail stuck with me. For someone he risked everything for, he let her walk out easily. 2 days passed, then 3. The anger faded, replaced by something colder. I started noticing how light I felt without the constant need to explain myself. No one questioning my reactions, no one rewriting events to suit their comfort. On the 4th day, he showed up at my friend's place. I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't shocked either. He looked tired. Not heartbroken, just worn down, like someone who had lost something valuable and only realized it after it was gone. "I just want to talk," he said. I stepped outside so my friend didn't have to listen. He apologized again, this time slower, more careful. He admitted he'd crossed lines long before anything physical happened. He said he didn't mean for it to get that far. He said he panicked when he realized he could lose me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked one question. If I hadn't walked in that night, how long would it have continued? He hesitated. That was my answer. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not coming back." He looked surprised by that, like he thought forgiveness automatically meant reconciliation. "She meant nothing," he said quietly. "That's worse. If she meant nothing, then what did I mean?" He didn't respond. Before he left, he asked if I had feelings for his best friend. The question felt misplaced, like he was still trying to assign blame elsewhere. "No," I said, "but he showed me respect when you didn't." That seemed to hurt more than anything else. After he left, I blocked his number. Not out of bitterness, but because the conversation was finished. There was nothing left to unpack. That evening, I found myself smiling at something small. A joke on TV, the sound of rain, the comfort of being alone without feeling lonely. It was strange how quickly peace can replace chaos when you stop chasing closure. What I didn't know yet was that my exit had shifted more than just my own life. It had triggered consequences neither of them were ready for, and those consequences were just beginning to surface. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had settled into a routine that felt alien yet freeing. No constant texts, no emotional manipulation, no pretending. Just work, friends, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't demand an explanation. It was strange how quiet life could feel once you removed the chaos that had been filling every corner. But that calm didn't last. It started with whispers. At first, subtle things. People at work commenting, friends asking if I'd heard about what was happening at his apartment. At first, I ignored it. I didn't care about gossip. It never touched me before. Why would it now? But then came the calls. Not to me, but to mutual acquaintances. Questions about what I knew, who I was seeing, and whether I had already involved his best friend in this mess. They were small, probing, and filled with judgment I had no intention of defending myself against. Meanwhile, my ex began making more public mistakes. His roommate had moved out, but had apparently told a few close friends what had happened. The lies he had told to justify everything started crumbling. People who had blindly supported him started asking questions, and for the first time, he wasn't the center of approval. Instead, he became the cautionary tale, the one who cheated, got caught, and couldn't control the narrative anymore. I didn't have to say a word. I didn't have to act. The story was playing out without me, and it was satisfying in a quiet, almost shocking way. Then came the texts from him, which I ignored at first. They shifted from anger to confusion, then desperation. At first, I thought about reading them, but curiosity gave way to the realization that every word he wrote was only about him. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the betrayal itself, just pleas for control, for answers, for me to validate him. I kept scrolling past them, each ignored message a weight lifting off my chest. His best friend, however, became a source of unexpected clarity. He called one evening, his tone cautious, almost hesitant. "Things are getting messy over there," he said. "I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" That was it. No lectures, no moralizing, no trying to position himself between us. Just a simple question, human and real. I realized then that respect is not about protecting someone from consequences, but about seeing them through a difficult moment without judgment. The apartment itself became a battlefield of rumors and shifting alliances. His friends started taking sides, not realizing the full story, and even those loyal to him found cracks where loyalty had been blind. The roommate, who had once seemed untouchable and composed, suddenly had to defend herself in ways she hadn't anticipated. The calm exterior I had seen when I confronted her was gone. She was scrambling. And my ex? He was unraveling in ways he had never faced before. The combination of guilt, exposure, and public shame was something no apology could fix. I watched from a distance, choosing not to engage directly. Part of me wanted to text him, scream at him, or at least demand recognition for the pain he had caused, but I didn't. Every message I didn't send, every call I didn't answer, was a quiet assertion of control over my own life. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to someone else's chaos. I was observing it. And in that observation, I realized something powerful. I was no longer defined by his decisions. Then came the turning point. I ran into one of his mutual friends at a coffee shop, someone who had been close to both of us. They didn't know I had been at the apartment during the confrontation, only bits and pieces. They hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you know everything?" I looked them straight in the eye and said, "Everything." Their shock was immediate. They had assumed he was blameless, that the roommate had somehow been the problem. Suddenly, the narrative shifted again. What had seemed like whispers was now public acknowledgement. People were beginning to see the story for what it really was. By the end of the week, the weight I had carried for months, the betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, started to lift. Not because the situation changed, but because I had stepped out of it. I had reclaimed my story, my actions, and my voice. And as much as part of me had feared moving forward alone, I realized that alone wasn't lonely. Alone was clear. Alone was unburdened. I didn't know what would happen next with him, or with her, or even with his best friend, but I did know one thing. I was no longer a character in someone else's story. I was the narrator of my own, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. By the time Monday came around, the apartment had transformed into a war zone of broken alliances and exposed secrets. I wasn't there, of course, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I had stayed away intentionally, choosing the distance over confrontation, and the effect of my absence was immediate. His roommate, who had once carried herself with calculated calm, was now on edge, constantly texting mutual friends, trying to justify what had happened, trying to control a story that was slipping through her fingers. She realized quickly that no one outside the apartment cared about her version. The narrative was no longer hers to manage. She had underestimated the repercussions, and now she was scrambling. Meanwhile, my ex was unraveling at a speed I hadn't anticipated. I had expected arrogance, excuses, even denial, but what emerged instead was panic. Friends who had previously defended him began to question everything. People who had accepted his stories without hesitation started noticing inconsistencies. He tried to call me multiple times, leaving messages that swung between pleas, veiled threats, and desperate justifications. I ignored them all, not out of cruelty, but because I realized that responding would have meant stepping back into a world I no longer belonged to. Every ignored call, every unread message felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I hadn't realized was missing. The fallout wasn't limited to personal relationships. Word had spread about the confrontation, the ring, the betrayal, and people who hadn't known the details now filled in the gaps with what they saw. Gossip isn't always accurate, but in this case, it amplified the collapse. Those who had been closest to him were now distancing themselves. One by one, allies who had once elevated him socially or emotionally began to see cracks in the image he had meticulously crafted. His power in that small circle eroded with every conversation, every side whisper, every questioning look. I received updates indirectly, from mutual friends, from snippets I overheard in passing, from social media. The roommate had started removing herself from conversations, hiding posts, trying to disappear from a narrative she no longer controlled. But erasing herself didn't fix anything. She had been implicated not by choice, but by association, and that reality couldn't be undone. Every interaction she had with his social circle carried the weight of what had happened, and the tension followed her like a shadow. My ex's behavior became more erratic. One friend reported that he had stormed into the roommate's new place demanding explanations and claiming that she had ruined everything. She, for her part, refused to engage and finally blocked him. That moment, I heard later, was pivotal. For someone who had once seemed untouchable, someone who controlled narratives effortlessly, there was suddenly no one left to manipulate, no one willing to excuse his mistakes. And for the first time, he experienced the isolation he had imposed on me for months, the loneliness of someone who had burned every bridge in sight. I noticed the change in our mutual social circle, too. Friends who had stayed neutral began to shift subtly. They asked me questions that I didn't have to answer fully. Their tone implied that they were reevaluating everything, reassessing loyalties. I didn't mind. I didn't crave validation, but seeing the collapse unfold from a distance gave me a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I realized that control had shifted from him to me simply because I had stepped out of the chaos and refused to participate. During that week, I began reclaiming more of myself. Small things, coffee shops I hadn't visited alone, music I hadn't played since the relationship started, quiet walks without thinking of him or his roommates, became acts of liberation. The world that felt suffocating now seemed wide and accessible, and while part of me still carried the sting of betrayal, that sting was no longer the center of my existence. Then came the final blow to his world, the realization that his best friend had quietly stepped back from the apartment entirely. I had heard rumors that he had taken some personal items, moved what he could, and quietly removed himself from a toxic environment. That quiet withdrawal, almost invisible to the others, left my ex standing alone. No allies, no one to defend him, no one to mediate or excuse his actions. He had lost control over the one person he relied on most, the one who had kept him grounded, and he had no one left to blame but himself. By the end of the week, I was no longer watching passively. I was living actively. I felt light, like I had shed a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The world that felt suffocating now seemed wide and accessible, and while part of me still carried the sting of betrayal, that sting was no longer the center of my existence. For the first time in months, I understood the simple truth. You can't control other people, but you can control how far their chaos touches you. I had chosen distance, integrity, and patience, and in doing so, I had reclaimed the only thing that truly belonged to me, my life. And with that realization came a quiet certainty. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my terms, not his, not hers, not anyone else's. By the following week, it was clear that the collapse wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. I didn't have to be there to see it, but the updates reached me in fragments. Messages from mutual friends, social media posts, rumors that couldn't be ignored. My ex, who had once acted untouchable, was unraveling in real time. He tried to salvage his image, posting vague apologies, half-hearted claims of self-reflection, but the tone was all wrong. There was no sincerity in his words, only the desperation of someone trying to rewrite a story that no longer belonged to him. People weren't buying it, and the more he posted, the more he confirmed what they already suspected. He had been reckless, selfish, and manipulative. Meanwhile, the roommate's retreat had turned into her own version of chaos. She had attempted to present herself as blameless, but when friends began comparing stories, the inconsistencies became impossible to hide. She claimed she had tried to prevent the affair, that she had acted only under pressure, but anyone with context saw right through it. The more she tried to explain, the more it exposed. Even those who had once been neutral began to doubt her motives, and soon she was left defending herself alone, caught in a storm of reputational fallout. I stayed removed from it all intentionally. I had no desire to gloat or to fuel the fire. I simply observed, learning more about human behavior in extremes than I ever wanted to know. What fascinated me most was how quickly the people who had supported my ex without question now distanced themselves. Friends, coworkers, even family members who had tolerated his arrogance were quietly reevaluating their loyalty. The power he had once wielded through charm and manipulation had vanished, leaving only a hollow version of himself, desperate for validation and unable to secure it. Then came the direct confrontation. One evening, he showed up at a mutual friends gathering, clearly hoping to find me there. He didn't, and the absence hit him harder than anything else. He tried to speak to others, pleading for details about where I was, how I was feeling, whether I had forgiven him, but the group had shifted. They had seen the aftermath, pieced together the truth, and no longer offered him the sympathetic ears he had counted on. He was met with silence, awkward glances, and careful boundaries. It was a public demonstration of his loss, and he felt every second of it. The next day, I received an indirect message. It wasn't from him or her, but from someone who had witnessed the fallout firsthand. You're lucky she didn't drag it all into public chaos. You handled it better than anyone expected. I read it twice, feeling the weight of those words. I hadn't acted recklessly, hadn't allowed anger to dictate my actions, and yet the world had shifted around me anyway. Observing consequences unfold without my direct involvement was more empowering than I could have imagined. By now, my ex had begun contacting mutual friends individually, trying to piece together allies one by one, only to realize that his efforts were futile. Each person he approached had already seen through the facade, and some had even shared details with me, underscoring just how isolated he had become. He was attempting damage control in a storm where the wind had already blown everything he valued out of reach. For the first time, I felt no guilt about the distance I had maintained. He was reaping exactly what he had sown. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding my own life, piece by piece. Simple things: a morning run without checking my phone, a coffee at my favorite shop, spontaneous lunch plans with friends, reminded me what it felt like to live without betrayal looming over every interaction. I began documenting my own thoughts, journaling the experience, reflecting on what I had learned. Boundaries, self-respect, and emotional vigilance became more than abstract concepts. They were practical tools I used every day to reinforce the life I was reclaiming. Then came the final blow to my ex, a confrontation he hadn't anticipated. His best friend, the one who had quietly supported me, finally spoke up in public settings. Small, firm corrections in conversations, subtle reminders that he had behaved irresponsibly, and a refusal to mediate any longer left him stripped of excuses. Those around him, seeing the consistent truth repeated by someone credible, began to label him for what he was: someone who had betrayed trust repeatedly, then attempted to manipulate perception after the fact. His social influence, already weakening, now crumbled entirely. I watched from my vantage point, uninvested but aware. For months, I had carried hurt, humiliation, and disbelief. But now, as the reckoning unfolded, I understood that real power wasn't in vengeance or in confrontation. It was in walking away, letting the truth expose itself, and refusing to participate in its construction. My ex's collapse was complete. The roommate's attempts at self-preservation were failing, and I, for the first time since everything began, could breathe freely, knowing that distance and patience had given me clarity, control, and an unshakable sense of self. By the end of the week, the chaos around them had quieted, not because the story was forgotten, but because the consequences had played out fully. People saw clearly who had acted selfishly, who had manipulated, and who had stayed true. And me? I was no longer part of the drama. I had survived, I had moved forward, and I was beginning to recognize the freedom that comes from stepping away while others flounder in the aftermath of their own choices. I realized the world I had stepped back into was mine to shape again. The chaos caused by my ex and his roommate had settled into lessons, and I was finally free to rebuild without looking over my shoulder. The first thing I did was reclaim my space, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. My apartment, which I had avoided for weeks to escape reminders of betrayal, suddenly became a sanctuary. I unpacked things I had shoved away, cleaned corners I had neglected, and even rearranged furniture to feel like it was truly mine again. Every small change was symbolic, reclaiming control in a life that had felt hijacked by others' lies. Friends became central to this rebuilding process. People I had leaned on in small ways before now stepped up with tangible support. They didn't question my choices. They didn't weigh in on drama. They simply offered their presence, their listening ears, and sometimes their laughter. One friend suggested a weekend getaway. Another invited me to dinners I had always declined. And slowly, I began reestablishing the sense of community I had lost. It was striking how much lighter I felt without the burden of constant manipulation hovering over every interaction. Work became another pillar of stability. I immersed myself in projects I had delayed or half-heartedly pursued during the months of emotional turmoil. Tasks that had seemed tedious before suddenly became opportunities to regain focus and direction. My productivity wasn't driven by ambition or proving anything to anyone. It was fueled by reclaiming a rhythm I had allowed to slip away. I realized that the life I had lost wasn't gone. It had just been buried under other people's chaos, and now I was digging it back out, piece by piece. Socially, I began noticing the absence of my ex's influence. Mutual friends, once hesitant to take sides, started reaching out to me with apologies or quiet acknowledgments of what had really happened. There were no grand declarations, just subtle shifts in loyalty that affirmed what I already knew. The truth had a way of asserting itself without me having to push it. Even those who had once been close to him were now seeing him differently. Some expressed relief, others disappointment, but all seemed to recognize the same thing. I had been treated unfairly, and I had handled it with dignity. Unexpectedly, his best friend emerged as a quiet ally, not in a romantic sense, but as someone who understood the entire scope of what had happened. He didn't lecture me, he didn't interfere, he simply acknowledged reality when necessary, corrected false narratives when they appeared, and offered perspective when I needed it. His presence, understated yet consistent, became a stabilizing force, a reminder that some people choose integrity over manipulation. That lesson stuck more than any confrontation or argument ever could. I also learned to enjoy solitude in ways I hadn't before. There were evenings when I'd walk without a destination, afternoons spent reading on a park bench, moments when I could sit in silence without feeling anxious or guilty. Those were small victories, but they were victories nonetheless. They reminded me that independence isn't just about surviving betrayal, it's about flourishing afterward, even when the scars are still fresh. The ring, once a symbol of confusion and unexpected connection, became a quiet reminder of resilience. It wasn't mine to keep, and I had returned it properly, but knowing its story, understanding its weight, helped me process boundaries and respect. It taught me that not every token or gesture is about ownership. Sometimes they're about the lessons they leave behind. By the end of that week, I realized I was no longer reacting to the chaos of others. I wasn't haunted by his lies, her excuses, or the gossip that had tried to follow me. The freedom I felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, steady, and undeniable. I was learning to trust my instincts again, to place boundaries where they belonged, and to recognize my worth independent of anyone else's actions. And slowly, a sense of anticipation began to replace fear. The future felt like an open field, no longer littered with remnants of manipulation or betrayal. I started making small plans, weekend trips, new classes, hobbies I had abandoned, and each action reinforced the truth I had come to embrace. Leaving wasn't just survival. Leaving was the beginning of rebuilding a life that was entirely, unapologetically mine. By the time part 8 ended, I could finally say it out loud to myself. I had survived the worst of betrayal, faced the collapse of someone else's world, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, clearer, and ready to move forward on my own terms. The drama, the chaos, and the heartbreak had played their part, but they no longer dictated the story. I did. By the time the final part of this story unfolded, the dust had begun to settle. Months had passed since that night I woke up with the ring on my finger, since the confrontation, since the whirlwind of betrayal and chaos. Life had grown quieter, but it wasn't empty. It was steady, grounded, and entirely mine. I had learned something crucial. Closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from watching consequences unfold without your interference and realizing that you no longer need to carry their weight. I had heard through mutual friends that my ex's life had started to spiral. His social credibility had crumbled completely. Those who once vouched for him now avoided involvement, tired of mediating or making excuses. The roommate had vanished quietly, perhaps to start over elsewhere, leaving behind only fragments of gossip that no one cared to follow up on. The people who had once formed their little circle of influence now saw the truth in stark relief. He had lied, cheated, and lost the trust of nearly everyone around him. No explanations, no apologies, no social charm could undo that reality. For me, the sense of freedom was profound. Every morning, I woke up without dread, without the instinct to check messages or prepare myself for confrontation. My phone remained mostly silent, a welcome relief from the constant emotional turbulence I had once endured. I could go to work, meet friends, even scroll through social media without fear or suspicion. Small moments, a cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a quiet evening with a book, felt heavier in meaning than ever before because I had earned them. Each choice reinforced that I was no longer defined by the betrayal I had survived. His best friend, the one who had quietly supported me from the beginning, remained a presence in my life, but not in the way one might expect. We weren't romantically involved, though he had subtly implied he could be if circumstances were different. Instead, he became a benchmark for integrity, a person who had shown me that loyalty and honesty weren't just abstract ideals, they were actions. Seeing him act without ego or expectation reminded me that some people genuinely choose to do the right thing, even when chaos surrounds them. That lesson became part of how I approached my own life, my own relationships, and my own decisions. I also noticed an internal shift. Where once I had been reactive, anxious, or doubting, now I approached situations with clarity. I could set boundaries confidently, evaluate relationships realistically, and recognize early signs of manipulation before they gained a foothold. Betrayal had been devastating, yes, but it had also been instructive. I understood now that the way someone treats you is a reflection of their character, not your worth. That truth, once painful to accept, became liberating. Socially, I rebuilt selectively. I reconnected with friends who had drifted during the relationship, strengthened bonds with people I trusted, and created new spaces where judgment and gossip were absent. It wasn't about vengeance or proving anything. It was about curating an environment that nurtured rather than eroded my well-being. Slowly, I realized that this intentional rebuilding was more fulfilling than any drama could have been. I had a sense of control I had never felt before, and it was addictive in the healthiest way possible. The ex occasionally tried to reach me indirectly, through mutual acquaintances or cryptic social media posts, but by this point, it barely registered. I had nothing left to discuss, no narrative to correct, no feelings left to manipulate. The absence of his influence was more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. I had reclaimed the narrative entirely. Looking back, the ring incident, the betrayal, the confrontation, it all formed a chain of events that, while painful, had forced a transformation. I had learned resilience, the power of distance, and the importance of self-respect. I had experienced chaos, witnessed its consequences, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. Every choice I had made, every step I had taken had been deliberate. No one else could write this chapter for me. As the story closes, I stand in a life that is mine, fully and unapologetically. The chaos behind me has lost its grip, the people who caused it faded into the background, and I have stepped forward with clarity and strength. Betrayal taught me that endings are not always neat, but they can be freeing. The past no longer controls me. The lessons remain, etched into memory, but they empower rather than haunt. And as I take the next step, I know with certainty, I am not defined by what was done to me. I am defined by how I survived it, how I rebuilt, and how I continue forward, stronger, independent, and finally at peace. The story is over, but my life, my real, authentic, unbroken life, is just beginning. The weeks after the fallout were quieter than anything I had experienced in years. No messages, no confrontation, no constant reminders of betrayal. The world had shifted, and for the first time, I wasn't at the center of someone else's chaos. The apartment, the friends, the social circles, they all had moved on, and so had I. I began focusing entirely on myself. Simple routines, morning runs, reading in cafes, exploring new hobbies, became anchors. Each small act reminded me that life didn't need drama to feel meaningful. Even the memories of betrayal, which had once threatened to define me, became lessons rather than scars. I recognized patterns, learned how to set boundaries, and realized that my value was never dependent on someone else's choices or deceit. His world, by contrast, continued to crumble, quietly. Mutual friends shared updates. He had alienated almost everyone who had once defended him, the roommate had vanished without explanation, and the relationships he relied on had quietly dissolved. There were no public explosions, no dramatic confrontations. It didn't need to be theatrical. The consequences of his choices were absolute. I watched, detached, feeling neither satisfaction nor anger, only a calm sense of justice unfolding naturally. The ring, the symbol of confusion and unexpected vulnerability, had been returned to his best friend. Its story reminded me not of romance or betrayal, but of how small gestures can hold weight beyond intention. I understood that some moments aren't about possession. They're about understanding boundaries and recognizing the responsibility we carry when lives intersect. I also realized the importance of the people who stayed consistent. His best friend, who had quietly supported me, became a reminder that loyalty and integrity exist outside of chaos. His presence, steadfast and unobtrusive, helped me see that true support isn't about dramatic interventions. It's about showing up without needing credit or recognition. By now, I had fully reclaimed my life. I no longer dwelled on what was lost or who had failed me. The anger, the heartbreak, and the humiliation had all transformed into clarity. I chose who to let in, what to share, and how to spend my time. Independence, I realized, was far more satisfying than any relationship built on lies. And with that clarity came peace. I walked through my days without fear or expectation. I pursued joy without guilt, connected with people without caution, and made decisions without doubt. I had survived betrayal, witnessed consequences, and rebuilt myself from the wreckage of someone else's mistakes. In the end, I understood this simple truth. Life isn't about the people who hurt you. It's about how you move forward after they're gone. I had chosen to step away, to reclaim my narrative, and to live on my own terms. That choice, more than anything else, became my freedom. And finally, I was free.